It began on an ordinary autumn afternoon in the early 1990s, a day that promised camaraderie, thrill, and the simple joy of flight. None of us, a ragtag group of college students dabbling in the world of aeronautics, suspected that our carefree weekend jaunt aboard a weathered Cessna 152 would evolve into a harrowing plunge into a realm of terror beyond human comprehension. The summer heat was waning, and the fading light painted the sky in bruised purples and deep blues, as if nature herself were warning us of the coming calamity. I remember the day vividly. The crisp air, the low hum of the engine as we soared above the vast expanse of the San Francisco Bay Area, and a sense of freedom that belied the dread waiting just beyond the horizon. But as we ascended toward the rugged silhouette of Over Diablo, an unseen presence began to stir, an unnameable force that would soon seize control of our fate. This is not a tale for the faint of heart, for what unfolds is a chronicle of terror, cosmic manipulation, and a descent into a dimension where nightmares are the only certainties. The flight that promised adventure. The flight had started like any other. 2 seasoned pilots and I, a curious, wide-eyed passenger. We're set for a short journey from the local airfield to Stockton, with a planned return that involved a few landing exercises on small, deserted airports. We laughed easily in the cramped cockpit of the Cessna, exchanging banter and recounting the many humorous escapades of our previous flights. The engine's purr was steady and reassuring, its vibrations a comforting reminder of human ingenuity and the marvel of flight. As we climbed to a cruising altitude over the gentle hills and farmlands, the familiar landscapes below belied the strangeness that lay ahead. Our conversation was light, the mundane topics of flight plans and navigation charts filling the space between us. Yet, even in those early moments, a subtle shift in the atmosphere began to unsettle our senses. The horizon, normally clear and distinct, started to shimmer as if seen through a heat haze, and the distant mountains took on an eerie, unreal quality. I was seated at the back, half listening to the pilot's technical chatter, while enjoying the novelty of flying above a patchwork of fields and scattered towns. Suddenly, a strange glimmer caught my eye through the small, fogged-over window, a flash of silver that darted silently across the sky. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the light, a reflection off a passing cloud. But as I watched, the flash repeated itself, its movement too deliberate, too fluid to be anything natural. The first seed of unease had been planted. 2. The ominous signs and the whisper of the unknown. As we approached Over Diablo, the serene blue sky began to darken unexpectedly. A cold wind replaced the earlier warmth, and the cockpit's familiar hum was joined by an almost imperceptible static in our communications. Our seasoned pilots exchanged glances, their eyes narrowing as if they could see something beyond the instrument's readings, a disturbance that defied explanation. "Did you see that?" one of the pilots finally asked, his voice low and tinged with disbelief. I could feel my heart quicken as I strained to catch every nuance of the conversation. The engine, which had been our steadfast companion, began to stutter. A few hesitant clicks emanated from the throttle, followed by a disconcerting silence. Despite our routine checks and the experienced assurances of the pilot in the co-pilot seat, the engine failed to respond. A cold dread seeped into the cabin, turning our light-hearted expedition into a desperate struggle against an unseen force. We contacted the local tower to report our predicament. The response crackled through the radio, disjointed as if underwater, and then without warning the connection dropped altogether. A momentary silence, heavy and foreboding, hung over us before the pilot's voice returned, strained and edged with panic. "We're not alone up here, something's interfering with our systems." At that moment, outside the window, a colossal, otherworldly object appeared. It hovered with an uncanny precision, its surface reflecting the fragmented light of a dying sun. The shape was indistinct, simultaneously circular and oblong, its edges blurred like they were dissolving into the night. The object pulsed with an eerie, phosphorescent glow that seemed to bleed into the very atmosphere. It was as if a cosmic entity had reached down to pluck the strings of our reality, manipulating time and space with every silent beat of its mysterious heart. In the cockpit, alarms began to wail, a dissonant chorus of warning signals that heightened our collective terror. The instruments danced erratically, the needles jittering wildly, as if possessed. The familiar navigational charts turned into indecipherable sigils and hieroglyphs, twisting in patterns that defied the laws of physics. I felt as though we were caught in the gravitational pull of a cosmic enigma, dragged inexorably toward a fate we could neither understand nor escape. Descent into madness, the UFO's malevolent influence. The UFO, if one could dare to call it that, exerted a presence that was both mesmerizing and horrifying. Its influence was immediate and pervasive, bending not just the laws of flight, but the very fabric of our reality. From the cockpit, I could see the stars outside distort and elongate, their familiar constellations replaced by swirling vortexes of light and darkness. The darkness seemed to breathe, pulsating in time with the mechanical thrum of the alien craft. The pilots, stalwarts of rationality, were visibly shaken. Their calm professionalism gave way to frantic gestures and hurried commands as they attempted to wrest control of the failing engine. "Restart the engine. Check all systems," one cried, his hands trembling on the controls. But no matter how many times the engine was coaxed back to life, it remained inert, a silent witness to the power of the unfathomable force that now held sway over us. Outside, the alien object loomed larger, its true scale impossible to fathom. It was as if we were being watched by an intelligence that existed beyond our petty human concerns, a sentinel from realms unknown. The craft's surface shimmered with a liquid metallic sheen, reflecting not only our terrified faces, but also visions of distorted landscapes and impossible geometries. I could swear that the object was communicating with us, not through words, but through a series of images and emotions that flooded my mind. There were flashes of cities swallowed by darkness, of skies torn asunder, and of beings whose very existence defied comprehension. A sickening sensation of vertigo washed over me as the aircraft began to tilt. The force of gravity seemed to warp around us, pulling us into a spiraling descent that felt less like a fall and more like a deliberate act of cosmic retribution. The cockpit, once a safe haven of familiar instruments and controls, had transformed into a battleground where the laws of nature were being violently rewritten. In that moment, time itself became a fluid, malleable substance. Seconds stretched into minutes, and minutes into an eternity of terror. The passengers, those few other souls on board, seemed to share a collective wordless horror. Their eyes, wide with unspoken dread, darted around as if searching for an escape from a nightmare that had become all too real. Every surface in the cramped cabin seemed to pulse with an otherworldly glow, and the very air vibrated with a palpable energy that hinted at dimensions beyond our own. I tried to steady my breathing, to anchor myself to the rational world I knew, but the oppressive atmosphere was relentless. The voice of the tower, now replaced by a cacophony of ghostly echoes, reverberated in my ears, urging me to abandon hope. "We're not meant to survive this," I thought, the words echoing in the depths of my mind like a death knell. For the unraveling, a battle against cosmic forces. As the descent continued, the plane's trajectory grew erratic, defying any semblance of control we once had. The once familiar dials and gauges now flickered with symbols that made no sense, their erratic behavior mirroring the chaos outside the fuselage. A sharp, cold wind began to howl through the cabin, carrying with it a series of incoherent whispers, snatches of voices that seemed to speak in a language older than time itself. Each whispered syllable was laden with foreboding, an incantation of doom that sent shivers down my spine. The pilot in the co-pilot seat fought desperately with the controls, his eyes darting between the instrument panel and the rapidly approaching ground below. "We're losing altitude. Fast," he muttered, his voice barely audible above the tumult of alarms and the howling wind. It was then that the realization struck us all: our descent was no longer governed by gravity alone. An inexplicable force, as cold and relentless as the void of space, was accelerating our fall. From my seat, I peered through the fractured window and witnessed a sight so surreal it defied logic. Below us, the world was not the familiar patchwork of fields and roads, but a twisted landscape of undulating hills and impossible angles. The once verdant golf course, which had seemed a benign landing target earlier, now loomed as a sinister expanse of distorted geometry, a nightmare painted in hues of deep crimson and shadowy black. The turf undulated like the surface of a disturbed pond, and the fairway twisted in unnatural curves, leading our doomed aircraft toward a collision course with fate. And then came the most disturbing phenomenon of all. Amidst the chaos, the cabin lights began to flicker erratically, bathing everything in a strobe of ghastly illumination. In the intermittent darkness, I saw fleeting images of figures, shadowy, indistinct shapes that seemed to drift at the periphery of our vision. Were they other passengers or specters conjured by our collective terror? The line between reality and hallucination blurred as the very air in the cabin seemed to vibrate with the echoes of another dimension. The radio crackled once more, not with the reassuring voices of ground control, but with a garbled, almost musical static that sent a chill through my very soul. It was as if the UFO was broadcasting its own sinister signal, a maddening frequency that warped the mind and unsettled the spirit. In that moment, I felt a strange pull, as though invisible hands were tugging at the edges of my consciousness, beckoning me toward a reality that lay just beyond the veil of our understanding. I clutched at the seat in a futile attempt to ground myself, but the forces at work were too powerful. The plane shuddered violently, and a deep, resonant hum filled the cabin, a sound that seemed to originate not from any machine, but from the very fabric of the cosmos. Every vibration of the air, every tremor of the aircraft, spoke of a presence that was both ancient and malevolent. The inevitable crash, a dance with death. In what felt like an eternity of chaos, our aircraft began its final, unrelenting descent. The pilot's frantic commands became lost in the roar of an otherworldly storm. The UFO, now impossibly close, loomed over us like an unblinking eye of judgment. Its immense bulk obscured the stars, its pulsing lights drowning the cockpit in an eerie, supernatural glow. I could see, in the fleeting moments between blinding flashes of light and crushing darkness, the terror etched onto every face, each one a silent testament to our collective helplessness. We aimed for what we believed was a flat stretch, the once inviting golf course that, in our panic, had been mistaken for a safe haven. The plan was simple if desperate: slow our descent, align the aircraft with the open field, and make a hard but controlled landing. But as we neared the ground, every instinct screamed that this was not the familiar Earth we once knew. The field was a warped, nightmarish vision, a shifting mosaic of light and shadow that defied all logic. "Brace yourselves," the captain shouted, his voice strained with the effort of fighting not only gravity but the unseen force that pulled us downward. We braced, our bodies slamming against our seats as the plane shuddered in a series of violent jolts. For one dreadful moment, time seemed to suspend itself. I closed my eyes and prayed for salvation, for some miraculous reprieve from the horror that was unfolding before us. The first impact came with a bone-jarring collision, a violent lurch that sent us careening off course. The aircraft slammed into the uneven surface of the golf course, its tires skidding over a terrain that no longer obeyed the laws of physics. Metal groaned under the strain, and the cabin filled with a cacophony of alarms and the frantic shouts of a crew fighting a losing battle against destiny. Then, in a twist that defied even our wildest nightmares, the plane lurched upward again. It was as if we had struck a ramp built not by human hands, but by the capricious whims of an alien intelligence. The wings tore free upon colliding with gnarled, spectral branches that emerged from the ground like skeletal fingers. I felt a sharp, searing pain as debris struck my face, and for a brief, agonizing moment, I was certain that death had come to claim us all. The aircraft spiraled out of control. I watched disbelieving as the world outside the window transformed into a swirling maelstrom of color and shadow, a vortex that seemed to suck in every ounce of hope and replace it with an overwhelming sense of doom. The cockpit had become a surreal theater of terror, where the boundaries between life and death, reality and nightmare, blurred into an indistinguishable haze. In those final seconds before impact, every sense was assaulted by the inescapable truth. We were being pulled not merely toward the ground, but into a chasm of cosmic despair. The engines, silent witnesses to our unraveling, had become mere props in a play directed by forces far beyond our comprehension. The eerie hum of the UFO mingled with the crash of metal and the screams of the doomed, crafting a symphony of terror that will forever haunt my dreams. 6. Aftermath. The haunting echoes of the unknown. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the cacophony faded into an oppressive silence. I found myself clinging desperately to the remnants of my seat belt, the fractured pieces of the aircraft around me now little more than twisted metal and shattered glass. The interior of the plane was cloaked in an unnatural quiet, as if the very concept of sound had been exiled from this accursed place. I looked around in disbelief, searching for the familiar faces of my companions, only to find them scattered in disjointed forms, each figure a ghostly echo of life, frozen in a tableau of shock and agony. I stumbled from the wreckage, my limbs heavy with shock and disbelief, and onto a cold, unforgiving curb. The world outside, still under the ominous glow of that infernal UFO, appeared as a distorted, nightmarish reflection of the life we once knew. Sirens wailed in the distance, a sound that should have brought comfort, but instead deepened the sense of impending doom. First responders arrived, their faces masked in grim determination as they moved among the debris, their eyes betraying a flicker of something that could only be described as horror. One of them, a grizzled veteran with a look of grim resignation, peered into the cockpit. His face, lit by the flashing emergency lights, contorted into an expression of utter disbelief. "What the hell?" he muttered, almost to himself before shaking his head as if to expel a terrible secret. It was then that we realized the final unanswerable truth. The cockpit was empty, as if the very soul of the plane had been siphoned away into the void. I pressed my trembling hand to my chest, feeling the rapid, erratic beating of my heart, a frantic percussion that seemed to echo the pulse of that alien craft still hovering in the heavens. In that moment, it became clear that our ordeal was far from over. The UFO's influence had not ended with the crash. It had seeped into our very beings, leaving an indelible mark on our souls. We were no longer simply survivors of a tragic accident, but unwitting witnesses to a cosmic horror that defied explanation. In the days that followed, as I slowly pieced together the fragments of my shattered memory, a disquieting pattern emerged. There were reports of inexplicable phenomena in the vicinity of the crash, a series of eerie lights dancing in the night sky, bizarre signals intercepted by local radio stations, and accounts of phantom figures roaming the periphery of the disaster site. Some witnesses claimed that time itself seemed to warp in the area, with minutes stretching into hours and the very air vibrating with a frequency that resonated deep within their bones. I began to experience unsettling dreams, vivid and relentless. In these nocturnal visions, I was once again aboard that doomed Cessna, hurtling toward a vortex of unearthly light and terror. The cockpit transformed into a surreal nexus where the past, present, and future converged in a disorienting tapestry of images. I would see my fellow passengers, their faces contorted in silent screams, their eyes reflecting the cold, indifferent gaze of the UFO as it loomed above. And always in the background, there was the unyielding hum, a reminder of the cosmic force that had altered our destiny. Night after night, the dreams intensified until the line between sleep and waking blurred. I found myself haunted by the sensation of being pulled into another dimension, a dark, parallel realm where logic and reason were meaningless, and where the only constant was an overwhelming sense of dread. The memory of that day, of the plane's violent descent and the surreal terror that accompanied it, became an inescapable specter. I began to fear the darkness, the quiet moments when the boundaries of reality seemed to thin and the faint, distant sound of that alien hum echoed through the corridors of my mind. Investigators who came to examine the crash site were left with more questions than answers. Technical analyses of the wreckage revealed anomalies that defied conventional explanation. A series of inexplicable malfunctions in the avionics, electronic components that had been fried by an unknown energy surge, and inexplicable patterns etched into the metal of the aircraft. One expert, his hands trembling as he examined a charred fragment of wiring, whispered that it was as though the plane had been touched by something not of this earth. Over time, the initial shock of the crash gave way to a lingering dread, a pervasive atmosphere of fear that clung to the memories of all who had been involved. The area around Over Diablo became a place of whispered legends and unsolved mysteries, a dark landmark on the map for those who dared to explore the boundaries of known reality. Locals spoke in hushed tones of ghostly lights in the sky, strange signals on the radio, and the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. It was as if the UFO's malevolent influence had seeped into the land itself, an enduring reminder of the terror that had descended on that fateful day. The lingering curse and the unanswered questions. Even now, years after that dreadful flight, I find myself waking in the dead of night, heart pounding and eyes wide with the residual terror of that encounter. The vivid memories of the alien craft, the distorted landscape, and the palpable dread of those final moments remain as indelible as scars on my soul. I have often wondered if our experience was a singular aberration, a freak accident caused by a mechanical failure, or if it was, in fact, the deliberate handiwork of an intelligence beyond our understanding. Late one evening, unable to escape the relentless pull of memory, I returned to the site of the crash. The land was quiet, bathed in the silver light of a full moon, yet every step I took was haunted by the invisible presence of that cosmic visitor. I wandered among the twisted wreckage and the silent remnants of what had once been our aircraft, each fragment a reminder of the terror that had irrevocably altered my life. In the stillness of the night, I could almost hear the faint, rhythmic hum of that UFO, a sound that resonated deep within my bones and made the hair on my arms stand on end. I questioned local residents who spoke with a mixture of fear and resignation about the inexplicable events surrounding the crash. Some claimed that on quiet nights, when the wind whispered through the trees, they could hear voices, mournful, otherworldly laments that seemed to call from beyond. Others swore that they had seen lights moving in patterns that defied natural explanation, as if the very sky were alive with the echoes of an alien intelligence. The more I learned, the more I realized that our crash was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader tapestry of cosmic interference, a dark chapter in a story that spanned far beyond our understanding of time and space. The lingering curse of that day was not limited to my memories alone. In the weeks that followed, I encountered inexplicable occurrences, reflection in a window that wasn't my own, the sudden disappearance of familiar objects, and an overwhelming sensation of being observed by unseen eyes. Even the most mundane moments were now imbued with a palpable sense of foreboding, as though the boundaries between our world and that alien dimension had been irrevocably weakened. I have spent countless sleepless nights poring over old flight logs, technical manuals, and obscure reports of similar phenomena. There were accounts from other aviators, a few who had encountered strange, unexplainable signals in the skies, and even a few rare instances of aircraft behaving erratically in ways that defied mechanical explanation. Though most dismissed these reports as coincidences or the product of overactive imaginations, I could not help but see a pattern, a hidden network of events that pointed to the presence of something beyond our mortal ken. The question that gnawed at me relentlessly was this: why us? Why our flight on that unsuspecting day became a stage for such cosmic terror? The answer, if there is one, remains shrouded in mystery, locked away behind layers of silence and denial. Perhaps the UFO had chosen us for a reason known only to itself, a brief experiment in the manipulation of fate, a demonstration of its power to alter the very fabric of existence. Or perhaps it was a random act of cosmic malice, an event that was as unpredictable and unfathomable as the swirling galaxies overhead. In the final analysis, our crash was not simply an accident. It was an encounter with a force that defied explanation, a collision between the known and the unknowable. The echoes of that day continue to reverberate in my life, a constant reminder that there are vast, dark mysteries in the universe that we are ill-equipped to comprehend. And while I have tried in vain to move past the trauma, the memory of that alien presence, the relentless hum of its cosmic power, remains etched in every heartbeat, every waking moment. 8. Epilogue, The Endless Vigil. I share this story not as a boast of survival, but as a solemn warning. The skies are not as empty as they seem, and the void between the stars is alive with forces that are indifferent to our existence. That day over Over Diablo, when a simple flight turned into a nightmare, shattered our illusions of safety and control, we came face to face with a reality where the boundaries between science and superstition, logic and madness, were blurred beyond recognition. Even now, as I write these words with trembling hands, I feel the weight of that encounter pressing down upon me. The UFO, the silent, ominous architect of our fate, continues to haunt my dreams and my waking hours. I often wonder if, somewhere out there in the infinite expanse, it watches and waits, its inscrutable motives hidden behind an impenetrable veil of alien logic. And if it does, then perhaps it is only a matter of time before another unsuspecting soul is drawn into its orbit, pulled into a dance of terror that leaves no witness unscarred. My journey into understanding has been fraught with peril and unanswered questions. The further I delve into the accounts of others who have seen the inexplicable, the more I realize that our world is a fragile construct, a delicate balance of light and darkness, of order and chaos. And sometimes, in the blink of an eye, that balance is disturbed by forces that have no regard for our petty notions of safety and reason. As I conclude this chronicle of terror, I do so with the hope that those who read it will take heed, look to the skies with a cautious eye and an open heart, for there are mysteries beyond our comprehension lurking in the void. And if you ever find yourself alone in the night with the silence of the heavens pressing in around you, remember that the truth of our existence is intertwined with the unknown, and that some encounters, like the one we experienced, can never truly be forgotten. May this tale serve as both a memorial to those lost in the grip of cosmic horror and as a stark reminder of the fragile barrier that separates our world from the abyss beyond. For in the depths of that unfathomable darkness, where time and space unravel into chaos, there remains one eternal unsettling truth: we are never truly alone.